So today we're going to talk about dyslexia. Hold on, let me just say, got it. I was sent some of the questions that Family Connections gets most frequently about dyslexia. So I tried to organize the presentation according to those questions. It kind of falls into a logical order. And so I'm hoping I will address some of your issues. And if not now, maybe after the presentation is completed. So this next slide lets you know and remind you that Family Connection is South Carolina's parent training and information center, and what a great service it provides to all of us. So we're going to start off with what is dyslexia. This is not an easy question to answer, but several people have tried to do it. So we're going to look at what the definitions are. There are many definitions you can look at, and what the characteristics of children with dyslexia are. So that will be the first part of our presentation. What is dyslexia after all? Now, I'm just going to pull my slide down a little bit. Oops, sorry. Dyslexia is considered a learning disability. If you think of the term learning disability as a big umbrella that encompasses many different types of disability, dyslexia is one of those underneath that umbrella. So most students with learning disabilities, around 85%, have a disability in reading, okay? How many of those kids actually have dyslexia, and how many just have what we would consider a learning disability in reading? It's not clear. There's so much overlap in the identification. So reading disabilities can take many forms, and it can encompass many different aspects of language. Some are referred to as dyslexia. And we're going to look at some of the definitions. You'll have time to look at them on your own, but we'll pull out what those common factors are that we see in every definition pretty much. And it's always helpful to realize this last point here, that regardless of whether a student has been identified as having dyslexia or not, most of the interventions that are going to be provided to students with learning disabilities are going to be very similar, whether a child has dyslexia or does not have dyslexia, because we tend to see the same root problems occurring. So I tried to pull in what our state says, as well as federal or national kinds of definitions. And so there is something called the South Carolina Dyslexia Handbook, with which you may be familiar already. I have a link in a subsequent slide. And this tells you what how our state defines dyslexia. I've underlined the key piece, and you see that it affects a kid's ability to read, write, and spell, or an adult's ability to read, write, and spell. It's considered a lifelong disorder, and we don't know what the exact cause is, but it's considered to have a neurobiological basis. What does that mean? That means that the way the brain processes information related to reading and writing and spelling is sometimes different than what a child without dyslexia might experience. It doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just different. And so that means the way that child might interact with the English language or other languages may be different than it would if the child does not have dyslexia. Do we have everything identified and know exactly how this happens? No. We do know that with some interventions, however, that neurobiological change becomes more similar to those with kids without dyslexia, which is interesting. You will see the next sentence. These difficulties in reading have no connection to intelligence. In fact, dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty. You see this in all the definitions. It's unexpected. What does that mean? That means if you were chatting with this child, you would not anticipate that they had difficulty in reading. It used to be that we would measure this in terms of IQ and achievement, so that a child with an average to above average IQ who was reading below grade level, that would be an unexpected difference in reading, okay? So it's unexpected, we don't anticipate it. And Dyslexia exists on a continuum from low to high, and some children may qualify for special education services. As we will see in the next couple slides, and it may surprise you, diagnosis of dyslexia doesn't automatically mean that child will receive special education services. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more. These are current definitions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can look at them. And I tried to get them from all different sources. We have the Dyslexia Association, a neuroscientist, LD Online, and the National Institute of Health, which kind of qualifies as our federal definition. But you will see that these definitions, if you can read them at your leisure, but they essentially all say the same thing. That the definition, that the dyslexia is considered neurobiological. That means it's not caused by poor teaching. It's not caused by the environment. It's not caused by family issues. It's not caused by emotional or behavioral issues. It is something internal to the child. Okay, and this is very important. This is also a very important factor in learning disabilities in general. If you look at the federal definitions, it is unexpected, as I've already said. It is lifelong. Does that mean an 8-year-old who is reading at the kindergarten level is going to always read at the kindergarten level? No, but it means that this child will continue to have to think about how to spell words, will have to think about reading aloud if they are in a situation in which they have to do that. It is something that is there even when children learn effective coping and reading strategies. Okay. Reading, especially word reading, spelling, written, and other language difficulties. Most of the focus of dyslexia in terms of definition focuses on the word reading level. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So that means the issues tend to show up early. They tend to show up kindergarten, first grade, second grade, when children are learning how to read. And it also means that later difficulties in listening, in comprehension, may be a result of the poor word reading issues, okay? So if you look through all these different definitions, you will see that focus on auditory processing, on word reading, in other words, connecting the sounds to the symbols in order, okay? And there is a relationship to instruction, so that when kids are identified with having dyslexia, often you're looking, what kind of instruction did they get? Again, dyslexia is not a cause. Poor instruction is not a cause of dyslexia, but it is something to rule out in your diagnosis. Did this child get good instruction? And they are still having these issues. These issues persist. And we will define what good instruction is. Okay. And good instruction for kids who are at risk for dyslexia or other learning disabilities does not always look the same as good instruction for kids without reading disabilities. Okay. Are there different kinds of dyslexia? If you were to just Google right now, are there different kinds? What are the different kinds of dyslexia? You might see that there are 3 kinds. Somebody's going to say there are 4 kinds. I've seen as many as 12 different kinds of dyslexia identified. A lot of these are hypotheses. Okay, you do see some a couple issues that I've listed below that tend to distinguish a little bit, that you might see actually identified in an evaluation for a child with dyslexia, but they have just a million different kinds of dyslexia. But the point is for you to remember that these 3 basic types are most important. The first, particularly, phonological processing. And in all of these lists, 3, 4, 7, or 12, it will be called auditory dyslexia or phonological processing. This is most common. It's most frequently associated with the term and definitions of dyslexia, and all of the definitions you will see above in the list I gave you before. There's also something called visual or rapid naming dyslexia, which refers to the child's ability to pull information up quickly in terms of remembering what the letter A looks like, remembering what the sight word was looks like, okay? So again, the key piece, and the piece most commonly associated with dyslexia is the auditory or phonological processing. That is typically going to be your first key. Then we may have the visual piece in addition, and then double deficit, which means both auditory and visual. So you may have a child who has difficulty remembering those sound symbol relationships, and we're going to go into all these in a little more detail, as well as recall of things that they've been asked to remember, okay, such as sight words. You can't see my title here.
Let's see, it says South
What
Carolina.
is the processing for? Evaluating, is that what that says?
Mm-hmm.
So the Dyslexia Handbook, this is the link. It's a long handbook, and you can read this and see it outlines different ways in South Carolina kids are assessed, okay? It also outlines evidence-based practices for kids with learning disabilities. So it's a lot to read, and there's a lot of jargon, but it's good to have in your back pocket and to read it and to refer to it, particularly when you're talking, if you're a parent, if you're talking to children's teachers, if you're a teacher and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing in your schools relative to what the expectations might be. All right, so how are kids with dyslexia identified? In the state of South Carolina, we involve specific screening for reading disabilities, comprehensive evaluations, and something called MTSS, which is multiple tiers of support, which is that response to intervention, RTI piece that you may have heard about. That means if a child is not performing as expected as a typical second grader, let's say, they are performing at a lower level in the current reading curriculum, then children are given an alternative supportive reading curriculum that theoretically will match their needs. And then we see if in fact they are still able to progress, or if they continue to show challenges. This is a kind of MTSS and screening for reading disabilities will not in and of itself identify a child as having dyslexia, but it will identify a child who is not reading at the expected level for their grade level, okay? So this is going to be your first element people are going to look at in terms of is the more comprehensive evaluation necessary. I'm just going to say you want to make sure that if your child is in a tier 2 intervention, which would be the secondary intervention, if your child is not progressing as expected in the regular curriculum and they move to a tier 2, make sure your child is evaluated consistently in that tier 2 and is not stuck in that tier 2 level. That's just a personal concern I have sometimes. So what is the difference? How is a learning disability identified and how is dyslexia identified? Second bullet point, a learning disability is a comprehensive evaluation by a school psychologist, screening the MTSS, their performance relative to different kinds of instruction. This is to be categorized for the child to have the identifier of having a learning disability in reading. Dyslexia, the actual identification of a child as having dyslexia is typically done by an outside evaluation. A doctor, a physician, or a psychologist typically will do that dyslexia evaluation, which will be a comprehensive evaluation of their child's learning styles, etc. Important thing, if your child, if you enter a school district if you enter Lexington 1, for example, and your child is carrying a diagnosis of dyslexia from your private physician, from a psychologist, or from another area, that child will need to be reevaluated by the school district. And our school districts, every school district is going to be different, Okay, so there's no uniform process for identifying a kid with a learning disability in reading, but they will need to be identified here as having a learning disability in reading before they are able to receive special ed services. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. Simply presenting, they will look at that diagnosis, and that may be the prompt to then evaluate the child for learning disability. But remember, to receive special education services, the child is not performing at grade level, right? So they need to have a deficit in that reading skill that will require special education services. And so this is what this top bullet point says. And the second one essentially reiterates what I just said. In order to receive special ed services, a child must be identified as having one of the 13 categories, of disability, and one of those is learning disabilities. Some schools will focus more on the MTSS process. Some schools will still use a discrepancy, looking at IQ and achievement tests. Most districts now are just looking at a comprehensive evaluation, including different types of achievement tests and reading assessments, et cetera. And so it's just important to know this and to not get upset that this is just the way it is here. And understanding, now this comes, an interesting little side note is some parents might feel that their child is gifted, that their child has dyslexia, their child is reading at grade level, but their child, according to their perceptions of their child's ability, should be reading above grade level. Okay. Will that child be eligible for special ed services? Likely not, but you always, if that is your issue, talk to your district special ed folks about that. There may be differences in different districts of which I'm not aware, but typically in order for federal money to be used to educate your child, they must be performing below grade level. Okay. Now, we're going to look at some of the questions that I was sent had to do with what kinds of reading problems children with dyslexia might experience. Now, I'm going to go through a series of slides here that talks about 5 areas of reading. And if you're not a teacher, I hope this isn't boring to you, but I think it's really important because it does lead you to have the information that you might need when you are looking at the kind of education your child is receiving, when you're looking at the kind of curriculum that is being offered in your child's classroom. And if you're looking, and it also leads into some of the things you may be able to do at home to help support your child, okay? So this isn't going to be a giant reading course, but I do think if you look at the reading manual, the dyslexia manual, you will see these 5 areas of reading referred to. If you see how children with learning disabilities or dyslexia should be taught, you will see these 5 areas brought up over and over again. So I'm just going to review them so you have that background information. So when you look at most published descriptions of the type of challenges kids with dyslexia experience, you will see reading broken down into 5 areas. This is frequently called the 5 big ideas. All right, the following slides outline these 5 big ideas, and we'll look at how children with dyslexia might have difficulty or not have difficulty in each of these areas. I do want to say that we're looking at these separately, okay? Mainly because that's the way they're often presented, but also it clarifies where the deficits might lie for a specific child. It is not congruent with some of the bigger picture, different types of reading instruction, which look at reading more holistically. But whether you look at reading holistically or more skill or look at it based on specific skill areas, it's still very helpful to see exactly where those areas might show up for kids. Okay, and this is a little addition here. The state of South Carolina requires specific training intervention designed to address dyslexia for teachers in the K-3 and for reading coaches using 3 training modules. Okay, so this might have been 5 years ago that, I don't know, I worked on it, but there are 3 modules designed for teachers. Every teacher had to read this. Every teacher had to look at it if they were teaching in K-3 or they were identified as a reading coach in an elementary school. So these modules are on the state, South Carolina State Board of Education, okay, website. And you can follow this link. And there are 3 modules that you can see what teachers were taught. Okay, you can see the information that teachers were given to help them design programs. And this is general education teachers too. So if your child has not been identified yet or whatever. So anyway, they're videos, they were formed with higher ed faculty, special ed teachers, general ed teachers, literacy coaches, Orton Gilliam folks. I mean, it was all, everybody agreed on these things. And so, which is no easy task, you know, surprise, surprise. But anyway, there's something you can access and you may not have read it before, but it really will give you a little bit of insight and also give you a reference. If you are talking to your child's teacher, you can say, I read this. How is this being presented? Or how are you dealing with this for my student in this class? And how you can support the teachers who are doing these types of things in your class. Okay, so that's just a little link you can follow. So these are the 5 big ideas, okay? Phonemic awareness, alphabet principle, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. The top 2, you see with the single asterisks, are the key challenges for students with dyslexia in learning to read. Okay, manipulation of sounds and pairing sounds with letters. That phonemic awareness refers to the auditory part of it, rhyming words, which words start with similar sounds. Can you tell me the sound that at the end of the word cat? Can you tell me what sound that is? You don't have to look at a letter. You don't have to do anything. All right, that's what that is. And we're gonna look at each of these in more detail. And the alphabetic principle is when you add the letter, okay? You add that association. CH says ch, all right? So these 2, you can see, are the key challenges for students with learning disabilities. These are the key problems. This is the element of our auditory dyslexia. Okay, this is where most of our kids have issues. When we talk about word reading, this is what we're talking about. So, you know, you may have a child. I know lots of families with 2 kids and one kid, it looked like that child came out of the womb being able to read. They could read anything. They didn't have to have specific instruction. They just learned those sounds by being exposed to it. Then you have another child who it just seems like a sea of letters, a sea of sounds, and they just can't put that puzzle together, okay? A different way of processing information. So for most of our kids with dyslexia, this is the piece, phonemic awareness and alphabetic principle, that causes the most problem. You can see, and again, we're going to go into a little more detail, but these are kindergarten, 1st grade skills, right? Alphabetic principle carries through 3rd grade, but these are beginning skills. Identification early that a child may need a different reading method is very critical, okay? Fluency, reading smoothly. The way you can tell if a child has had this kind of intervention effectively is that when they read fluently. If your child is stopping, stuttering, starting, guessing, looking at the pictures, then they don't have what they need here. They're being presented with information that they have not yet learned to read, okay? If you add that visual dyslexia piece, this might be where that comes up. so that a child may not remember the word was or is or something like that. But typically, we work on this, and then once we have enough sounds and symbols and words to make reading possible, then we work on fluency. This is so key. Once you have a fifth grader who's guessing every other words, good luck. It's going to be such a challenge. Okay. You can see this several times in this presentation. Guessing is our enemy with kids with dyslexia and reading disabilities in general. So typically what happens is our issues here play into our difficulties here. If a child has trouble remembering what sounds go with what words, if they have trouble, if they look at CH and read it differently every single time, then they're not going to be fluent. It's going to interfere with their ability to get to higher level text, which is going to interfere with their ability to learn vocabulary and to understand what they're reading. So let's look at each of these in a little bit more detail, and I'll try not to take too long at them, but I think it's interesting for you to understand that. All right, first, phonemic awareness, the ability to hear and manipulate sounds. This is a kindergarten skill. Examples are rhyming words, hearing, repeating the first or last sound in a word, identifying if the first, middle, or final sounds in the words are same or different, using only sounds in wordplay. If you do not introduce letters, C says K, P says P. They don't need to know this in this skill. They need to be able to hear similarities. They need to be able to hear in sequence. It, what word is that? They don't need to look at the word. They just need to be able to hear it and put it together. This gets skipped a lot. If you are noticing your child is having trouble with rhyming words, for example, in a lot of picture books, there'll be a phrase and then the child learns to come up with the rhyming word that comes next. If you notice those kinds of things, practice these kinds of skills. But here's the thing, and this is what's so hard, because often we have to go back when we identify a child with dyslexia and start over again a little bit. We want them to get the sounds first, and then we add the letters. We want to get them to not, because they're going to have difficulty once you stick those letters in there. So we want them to gain confidence in being able to hear and distinguish sounds, okay? So what we know about phonemic awareness skills are they're the best predictors of early reading skills, okay? So children, four-year-olds who are good at phonemic awareness tend to be good readers. 4-year-olds who are 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds who are not good at phonemic awareness tend to have more difficulty, okay? So it's important. And I've already told you this, children have difficulty with sound-based activities, need to have practice manipulating. If you have a child with dyslexia or you suspect has dyslexia, and they are in kindergarten or first grade, you make sure that those teachers are doing phonemic awareness activities, and that curriculum includes that, okay? Much research, and this is very important, suggests that if done early and correctly, instruction in phonemic awareness improves phonemic awareness skills, and therefore improves early reading skills. If they learn the sounds first and can identify sounds, then it's easier for these kids to attach the letters to them, okay? It's a giant jigsaw puzzle, okay? And this is the second skill area where our kids with dyslexia have the most problem. And this is the alphabetic principle. This is the building block of reading. And we have to be very careful when we look at curriculum here, okay? I'm going to talk about this again later, but the alphabetic principle is associating sounds with letters and using that knowledge to decode words, okay? Blending sounds to make words. And this means you typically what we do is we teach kids the alphabetic principle. If we're targeting kids with dyslexia or other learning disabilities in reading, we are going in a sequential Dr. Seuss kind of way, okay? We're looking at simple structures. We're teaching kids CVC consonant words. Then we add an E on the end. We're being very specific. Because what happens, if you look at most books, children's books, if you look at picture books, or even if you look at books that children are asked to read at first grade, if you look at the sound of O, for example, you will see maybe in one chapter, in one book or in one set of 4 or 5 pages, you might see O, like road, R-O-D-E. You may see O-A. You may see O-U-G-H. You'll see all different ways of pronouncing that one, of spelling that same sound. For the kid with dyslexia, you're going through a sea of letters and sounds, and you don't have that ability to feel secure that you know what it is. So if we bombard kids with all these different sounds and all these different structures at once, and they have trouble attaching, it's really difficult. And then they start guessing. I mean, I have seen college students write a paper, students who have dyslexia, with the same word misspelled 5 or 6 different ways. Okay, why? Because it was just, they were just pulling, I know this, I think OA, I think it's OU, I mean, they were just pulling it. It's not like they made one error repeatedly. It was, and this is what you see with children who are confused because they haven't learned reliably what those sound symbol relationships are. So, and again, this is where you need to understand when you look at your children's curriculum, if they are young children, that they are learning, that kids are being taught specific word patterns and then practice it. And then they practice reading those to achieve fluency, okay? And they need this alphabetic principle structured in a very specific way. Now, it's very important for me to say, this does not mean it's going to be easy. A child who has difficulty with this is going to have difficulty with it regardless of how you teach them. You're giving them the most challenging thing, and you're trying to get them to read, and they have to do it every day, and it's a challenge, even with the best curriculum. The difference is, if you have the elements that you need, you're going to come out on the other side as a reader. If you have the elements you don't need, you're not going to come out on the other side. But just because a kid's in a good curriculum, they're not going to love to read, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. This is the hardest, think of the hardest thing that you do in your life. Maybe you can't carry a tune. If you had to sing a cappella every day for 2 hours, how you would feel about getting up there on that stage. I know it wouldn't be pretty for me. What it would do to your self-concept, how challenging it would be when you can't tell if you're in tune or not. And so it's really important to get this idea. But as I said, it will be a challenge. The right curriculum won't be easy, but you will come out on the other side as a reader, okay? So it's something called synthetic phonics, which means that you're looking at structuring the words that kids are learning in a specific way. You're learning short vowel sounds before you're learning long vowel sounds. You're not putting you're not learning a, and I at the same time. You're separating it to minimize confusion. So there's a very definite structure to how instruction should be taught, how these skills should be taught. This is the key though, folks. These first 2 areas of instruction. All right, and then I'm going to try and move a little quicker so I can get through all this. Fluency is reading accurately and smoothly, combination of speed, accuracy, and expression. This is your target, 1 word per 1 or 2 seconds. And this all means that children with dyslexia should be asked to read fluently only words when they've learned the pattern, or if they have a handful of sight words they've memorized, okay? If you're still a child shouldn't be asked to decode a word like through, T-H-R-O-U-G-H, if they have not been taught that. We need to control it. You know why? These kids have to be confident. They have to feel secure in what they're learning, and they have to be reliable. And, you know, the English language, there is a much higher incidence of, well, I don't have the reference here, so I shouldn't say it, but let me just say, English is no friend to children with dyslexia. It is so complicated, as opposed to Spanish, for example, where you have one sound, one symbol reliably. So that English is just really hard. It's hard for everybody. All right, so fluency is critical. So once you have kids who are reading certain words, you have to practice them. They have to get predictable, errorless reading, not guessing. And I'm saying that over and over again because so many reading curricula, even at the tier 2 level, involve essentially a picture book where children are asked to look at the pictures to figure out what the word is. We do not want that. That is not fluent reading, that is guessing. And if you are, again, if you're faced with doing this challenging task every day for hours, every day of your life, you do not want to be guessing. It's just going to get worse and worse. This is easy to implement, but often neglected. If you have a list of words that your child has been working on, practice reading them. Practice reading them. If your child's learned CVC E words with the letter O, practice, come up with some new ones. As long as they've learned the sounds, have them decode those. Practice them reading fast. That's what they need. You need to make sure that that fluency piece is important. Without fluent reading, your comprehension is really going to be a problem. All right, so here we have, I think, vocabulary, yes. So vocabulary refers to understanding the meaning of words, expressive and receptive. And here in this and in comprehension, these are tied directly to some suggestions I have for working with your child at home. Remember, we said reading dyslexia is often unexpected, okay? That means that we have children who intellectually may be quite bored by reading The Fat Cat Sat on a Mat, okay? These are children who we don't want to stifle in terms of their new vocabulary learning, their ability to do more advanced comprehension skills, because we are working at this more elementary level of reading. So we need to make sure, either through us reading to our children listening to other audiobooks or things like that, at their comprehension level, to continue to develop their vocabulary, okay? We don't want to, because we're stuck here in terms of working through the sound symbol relationship, we don't want that child to miss out on continuing to accelerate in their vocabulary and more advanced comprehension skills. If we're reading, very elementary level text, if you're 9 years old and you're still reading a kindergarten or first grade level book, well, you're able to do much more advanced comprehension skills likely than just what did the fat cat sit on, right? You're going to do more interpretive skills. You're going to do more advanced comprehension skills, and you just want to make sure you continue to do that. Okay, and that so vocabulary words must be chosen carefully, and this is what I was just saying. They can understand vocabulary much higher level. You just need to make sure you do that. And if, for example, if history teachers or geography teachers or science teachers do round robin reading or anything like that in the 6th grade class or the 7th grade class, the child with dyslexia may not be called on to read because it's challenging for them. They may be not attending to that. Make sure that that level text gets practiced at home in terms of the child hearing it and understanding what those vocabulary words might be. Comprehension can refer to listening comprehension and reading comprehension. If your reading comprehension questions are still fairly elementary, as I said, go to literal comprehension, inferential comprehension, etc. it's a really good idea. A lot of kids with dyslexia or learning disabilities in general have need practice in monitoring their comprehension skills. In other words, stopping after every page and saying, what did I just read? Okay, particularly if they're struggling hard, if they're actually reading it themselves and they're struggling hard to get through it. But also with listening comprehension, have kids practice periodically evaluating themselves. What did I just read? What was important about that? And give them some practice in doing that so that when they do get, because once they get to a certain level where they're able to read more complex text, they will have missed out on all of those developmental comprehension skills as they move forward. Children, one of the biggest problems is if a child is reading slowly and struggling through text, they can't remember what they just read. You can't remember what they just read. Okay, that's why all of these work together. The fluency really does affect this comprehension and makes a child feel much more able to understand what they've read. Okay, and this is the monitoring piece. Good. Jumping ahead, but that's okay. I can get through this. All right, so how should children be taught to read? Okay, what are some things that we need to know? So in most definitions and descriptions of dyslexia, if you look at all the definitions I gave you, you will see descriptors of what reading programs should look like and how they should be structured. You rarely, unless you are on the Orton-Gillingham side, you will rarely see a specific curriculum identified. Why? Number one, we see a lot of things going through What Works Clearinghouse and other vehicles for evaluating curriculum. So many of these studies are not able to be done in true experimental fashion. So a lot of them just don't show up. People are confused. It's not on What Works. Does that mean it's not good? This study didn't make the grade. Is it because of the results, or is it because it wasn't a random control design? You know, those kinds of things all affect it. What we do know, though, and what the research shows, is that certain components of curricula need to be present. So it's not so much Orton-Gillingham or any other. I mean, there's some that are frankly a disaster for kids with dyslexia, but you will see when we say the elements that they have to have, that these curricula need to have it. So it's not so much saying I need my child to be in this curriculum as saying I need my child to be in a curriculum that has these components. Okay. I know there were a number of questions about Orton-Gillingham, which is a very old curriculum that has been updated. But there are certain components of the Orton-Gillingham program that exactly meet what you want. Okay, and then there are others that are not necessary. But the point is, you want these couple of components in every one. And that is why so many of these websites just will not identify specific curriculum, because no curriculum has been shown to be the magic bullet. Okay. So the following elements are essential elements of reading instruction. I've outlined, I think, 3, maybe 4. First, the big ideas we've already discussed, but the key, and I hope you understand this, the key to how reading is presented focuses on those first 2 elements: phonemic awareness and alphabetic principle. Okay. Again, as I said, the way these are presented, almost every curriculum is going to say they address these 2 things, but it's the way they're addressed that's important. First, or number 2 on your slide, I'm pointing, I'm sorry, you can't see where I'm pointing. Instruction should be specific and explicit. Well, sure, teaching should be specific, but in fact, many reading curricula do not involve specific and explicit instruction, but rather allow for children to discover, look, this sound makes the same sound in this word as it does in this word. How are they similar? How are they different? They let the child discover what those patterns might be. And some children do beautifully in that. A full third of children don't, okay? And children with dyslexia really don't, because as I said, they are not making those associations reliably. So you want to make sure that if your child is in a curriculum at the elementary grades, or even if they're catching up at the middle school grades, that those specific sounds and symbols and word patterns are taught specifically. Children are not asked to figure them out by themselves, okay? Now, we might say, well, but isn't it, I mean, we're going to always come across words that we don't know. Don't we really want kids to be to explore and to figure that out? Well, sure, but not now, okay? Right now, again, we need kids to feel secure in what they're learning, and we need to make sure that this type of instruction is specific and explicit. You will see these terms in your other definitions. You will see them in the South Carolina Dyslexia Handbook. That is what they're recommending, okay? And you will definitely see it in the videos if you should look at those. And again, we don't want guessing, because that is what is going to happen. And please, if your child gets moved to a tier 2, make sure that their tier 2 instruction involves specific and explicit instruction and not word guessing. It happens. The third thing is systematic, okay? This means that we're looking at building blocks, okay? And we're learning these simple sounds first and these simple word patterns, and we're moving to more complex ones, then we're moving to more complex ones, and we're moving to more complex ones. So we're going in order, okay? So that we're trying to give kids a handle. The English language is so unpredictable. We're trying to contain it and give them that predictable piece first, okay? Until they get to the point where they can handle different types of ways of spelling and reading certain words. Pictures can be used in time to confirm content, but not to predict word reading, okay? And this may seem counterintuitive, because when we're reading picture books to young children, we're always looking at pictures, we're saying, what is this, etc. But think about your child with dyslexia as somebody who is going to try to escape the pain of figuring out this word however possible. And if your escape is look at the pictures and see, or that starts with an F. Which of these pictures starts with an F? Oh, I see a fire truck, I see a fat cat, I see a family. And so I'm going to guess it's one of those. Instead of attending to that word, then that is setting me up in a pattern for failure, okay? So we often will find pictures used. You read a page and then you have a picture confirming what you read, okay? So that you're not stuck with no pictures, but they serve a useful purpose, okay? So what do you look for? You look for an order. Some of the old basal readers, etc., and some of the new ones that schools might use, they're story-based, they're content-based. And at that point, if you happen to have a IGH, you're reading about a light, let's say, and so then you're going to introduce the IGH, even though the child still hasn't learned a very basic long I sound yet. So you don't let the curriculum dictate the system. You know the appropriate sequence, and therefore that is created from easy to difficult, okay? Practice should be frequent and cumulative. Can't say this enough, but it needs to focus on things that the child can read. I can't tell you how often I've seen people try to come across a word like about, and try and get a child to decode that word when they have no clue what OU says, or a word like is or was. What is was decoded? Was. Not good. So we have to, as parents, as well as teachers, know when to ask kids to decode things and when not, and what they've learned. All right, we've known these sounds, we know these patterns. These are the words we can decode. This is what I can expect my child to do, and this is what I'm going to practice. All right, what can you do at home? I've put some links here. This is how to teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons, which, you know, if only, but it's a helpful setup too, and it's structured in a good way. And so here's some other sources for you if you want to go to them. Oops, sorry. And the second point is what I've been trying to reiterate here. This is hard for your kids. If they come home and don't want to read a single word, you know, you've got to really think, do I want to really force this child to practice? How can I make this a game? Can you make a concentration game with pictures and match them with the same beginning sounds? Can you do something that's fun that will give your child practice that doesn't look like laborious reading for them, but still practice those skills they have? And this is easier to do if you're confident with your teacher in the classroom. Again, practice skills in an enjoyable way. So try to make it fun as you can. Give kids access to decodable books at their reading level. Make sure they have learned what you're asking them to read, okay? That's important. If your teacher is using a curriculum that includes decodable books, they may have some for home use that you can use, or you may be able to get some online that support the curriculum that the teacher is using. Think of fun ways. You know, I like to have, you know, when I was teaching at the elementary level, I'd let my kids read to the kindergarten class because they could read things that were on their grade level, that were on their reading level, that they didn't feel funny reading them because they were reading into young children. Although you have to do decodable books and not the regular brown bear. And this is the vocabulary. Read to your children or have audiobooks at the higher level. Conversation. Make sure you don't neglect that ability of those children to develop. And the stopping and periodically. This last piece is really helpful for your older kids who are getting to that point where they are reading good connected text and expository text, where you really have them stop, you know, and you can do this with expository narrative text like, you know, sports, you know, game descriptions, magazine stories, not independent reading if they haven't learned those sounds, but you can certainly do that auditorily. Okay, I've got 5 minutes.
You did it.
Hope I didn't go too fast. I'm sorry.
No.
I can't hear you.
Okay, here I am.
There we go.
I know that probably lots of folks wish that I had a mute button because I do have a big mouth, but yay, you did it. And that was so much really, really great information. We really appreciate it. And, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, we at Family Connection received so many phone calls about this. So I would like to mention a quick question that was in the chat. And this was about, you know, if your child already has an IEP with autism, specific learning disabilities, speech and language, how do you get them special education and OG methodology or, you know, teaching? You know, the child is in gen ed and is failing and struggling. What would be your recommendation, Dr. Marshall, for, you know, if the student already has an IEP, they already say child has a specific learning disability, what would be your recommendation for kind of next steps?
What kind of services is that child receiving would be my first question. If the child's in the general ed class all day, if they have a specific reading disability, if their learning disability is in reading, then they should be receiving some support services. Sometimes a teacher will come into the classroom. Sometimes there is co-teaching, but is the child receiving, the IEP is going to handle it all, and there needs to be, the parent needs to agree to the extent and type of services that the child is receiving for reading. And if they are not receiving anything, then we need to know why and where that child is getting those services. You know, the fact that the child has a diagnosis of both autism and specific learning disability is interesting, in that specific learning disability for something, for reading. And my question is, where is the child getting reading instruction, and how? What I would do is have a meeting with my teacher and say, or at your next meeting to evaluate the IEP, look at your child's progress. Your school should have been doing progress monitoring. Look at the monitoring. Is the child's progress not shown? Then you say, look, this child has not progressed in reading. I want something more specific. We need something more substantive to help support the reading instruction. I mean, that's where you need to go.
How do you figure out if it's a matter of how much time the child is getting versus, you know, like how much time, intervention time the child is getting versus what type of intervention the child is getting? How do you kind of tease out how to kind of put your finger on what the issue is?
Well, it's hard, but let me just say this: more of the same is not an intervention, right? So if you're saying, well, the child is getting an extra 20 minutes of the same instruction or the same type of instruction, then that is not necessarily what I want. That's not necessarily going to result in any change in prognosis. If you have, I mean, honestly, you know, I've seen tier 2 interventions where it's all assessment and there's no actual instruction being done. Ask to observe, see what's being done. And I think that typically, and this may not be the case for a child who has a longstanding IEP, but you want to feel that, okay, this is my child's challenge. This is the type of reading instruction they're getting. Is this instruction geared to my child's problem? If my child has trouble with alphabetic principle, if they have trouble decoding words, they're sequentially providing them with that kind of instruction? Are they reading books, you know, and pulling things out as, you know, I mean, you just need to know. Okay.
And I think Dr. Marshall is frozen for a minute there. Maybe she will come back. I know that we are almost out of time, or I think we are out of time. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. If you do have more specific
More
questions,
the same is not an intervention. 2.
Okay. There she is. Okay. You froze for a minute there. I was afraid.
I'm sorry, for my thing, it looked like you froze.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. If you do have any questions, if there's anything specific that we can help you with, I did include Dr. Marshall's email in the chat. And then you're also welcome to contact Family Connection anytime. We are here and always happy to help, and we'll get you connected with someone who can answer your questions. Until next time, thank you everyone for joining us, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.